The first night I stayed alone in my parents' house, I was more annoyed than scared. They had booked a last-minute anniversary trip and did not want to leave the place empty that long, so I got volunteered to house sit. I was 23, had just started working from home, and they lived only 20 minutes from my apartment. It made sense. I could feed the cat, grab free food, and enjoy cable and a big yard while they sat on a beach. Their house sits at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, one of those older suburbs where all the trees are tall and everyone knows everyone by first name. We never had break-ins growing up. We never had anything worse than kids ding-dong ditching in the summer. The worst thing that ever happened was when the neighbor across the street backed over his own mailbox. So when my parents left that afternoon, hugging me and repeating where the emergency numbers were stuck on the fridge, my only real concern was that I would get bored. That changed pretty fast. The first weird thing was the door. My dad is obsessive about locking doors. When he leaves the house, he double-checks every entrance in a little circuit. Front door, back slider, garage door, side gate. He did that before they left. I watched him slip the deadbolt on the front door and tug it to be sure. Then they drove off, and I went about my evening. I worked on my laptop at the dining room table until it started to get dark. Around 7, I got up to close the blinds on the front windows, something my mom always did so people could not casually look inside. When I passed the front entry, I noticed the door standing open 2 inches. At first I thought maybe I had not seen my dad actually lock it. Maybe I imagined the sound. I walked over and put my hand on the knob. The chain was still in its latch. The deadbolt was still extended. The door frame around the latch plate had a long split in the paint, just a thin crack, like wood slightly bending, but it had not been there that afternoon. I opened the door and looked at the porch. Everything looked normal. 2 potted plants, the faded welcome mat, the little metal table my mom used to hold mail. The street outside was quiet and empty. No cars, except the older sedan that always sat in front of the house 2 doors down. A neighbor walking their dog might have tugged the handle out of habit, I told myself. Delivery drivers did that sometimes before dropping packages, like they could not believe anyone still locked doors in this area. Maybe that small pull had shifted the frame enough to make the crack. It was not a good explanation, but it was an explanation. I closed the door firmly, felt the lock catch, then walked the entire house on a slow loop. Backslider locked, garage door shut. Windows shut in every room except my old bedroom, which I always left open a few inches for air. Nothing felt out of place. By the time I finished my walkthrough, I felt a little silly. I heated leftovers, watched a movie, and by 11, I was yawning. I set the alarm system my parents had installed a few years back, locked my bedroom door from the inside, and climbed into bed with the cat curling at my feet. I woke up at 3:24. That time is burned into my mind because I stared at the little digital clock for a solid minute, trying to figure out what had pulled me out of sleep. The house was quiet. No car alarms outside. No thunder. The cat slept in a warm ball near my ankles. Then I heard it. A soft, slow creak. It sounded like weight shifting on one of the stairs. Half of the staircase in my parents' house is open to the living room. The other half turns along the wall and disappears from view. When someone walks on it, each step makes a slightly different creak. I know that sound like I know my own name. I know what it sounds like when my dad walks up carrying a laundry basket or when my mom runs down in a hurry. This sound was none of those. It was a single creak, a pause, then another, slightly lower. Someone was on the stairs. The alarm panel downstairs should have screamed if a door or window opened. I listened for that shrill computer voice and heard nothing. Just another faint creak and a muffled bump against the wall. For a few seconds I tried to convince myself it was the house settling. Wood shifts at night, right. Temperature changes, little pops and groans. Except the pattern was too steady. A few slow steps, a pause, then a few more. I reached for my phone with shaking hands and opened the alarm app. The system status said, armed, no zones open, no recent activity. According to the system, the house was sealed tight. I held my breath and listened again. The next sound came from the hallway just outside my bedroom. A soft pad, like someone stepping on carpet in socks. This is the part where people always say they flung the door open and charged into the hall to prove there was nothing there. I did not do that. I stayed perfectly still. I reached over and closed my hand around the little can of pepper spray on my nightstand, the one my roommate had given me as a joke when I moved to the city. A shadow moved at the bottom gap of my bedroom door. Just a shift in the sliver of light from the hall nightlight. A darker shape passing by. Whoever it was did not try the knob. They just kept walking, slow, down the hall, toward the guest room at the end. After a moment, I heard the soft click of a door handle and the whisper of hinges. Then, nothing. I lay there with my heart pounding so hard it hurt. The cat lifted his head and stared at the door, ears flicking, then tucked back down like nothing was wrong. The obvious choice was to call the police. I pulled up the keypad on my phone and hesitated. What would I even say? That my alarm system claimed everything was fine, but I heard footsteps and a door open. That would get an officer eventually, but I could picture the look on their faces if they arrived to find nothing but a nervous woman and a disgruntled cat. After about 10 minutes without another sound, I told myself it had been a dream, a very realistic dream. But still, I forced my muscles to unclench and finally drifted back to sleep around 4. In the morning, I almost managed to forget about it. Sunlight in the kitchen made everything feel normal. I fed the cat, scrolled through my phone, and walked around the house again. Every door was locked. The guest room door stood closed, like always. I almost did not open it. When I did, the air inside felt different, a little cooler, a little heavier. The bed was neatly made, the way my mom had left it. The window was latched. The closet doors were shut. On the dresser, there was a hairbrush. Not unusual by itself. My mom kept spare brushes all over the house. What made me stop was the fact that several long strands of hair were tangled in it, dark brown, not the light gray she had now. I had cut my hair short years earlier. My mom had never had dark hair in this house. The only person I knew with that shade of brown was my ex, who had stayed with us only once back in college and left a brush here by accident. My mom had washed it and tossed it in a drawer. Now it sat in a perfect line in the center of the dresser, like someone had just used it and set it there with care. I backed out of the room and shut the door. That day, I took my laptop to a coffee shop and stayed out as long as I could. When I came back at dusk, every light in the house flipped on. I checked under beds. I checked closets. I opened the attic hatch with a broom handle and stared up into the shadows until my eyes hurt. I found nothing. The second night, I double-checked every lock. I set the alarm and then walked back to the panel twice more to confirm it was armed. I even put a chair under my bedroom doorknob like some nervous kid in a horror movie. Around 3 in the morning, the alarm chirped. Not the full siren, just a short beep. The kind it makes when a zone opens while it is disarmed. Except I had set it. The little control panel by my bed lit up with a message. System offline. At the same second, the night light in the hallway went out. The power was still on. My clock glowed. The ceiling fan turned lazily. Somewhere in the distance, the fridge motor hummed its usual low noise. But the alarm panel had gone dead. It clicked once. Then, the screen flashed back to life for a second, only long enough for me to see a different message. Back door open. The display went dark again. This time I did not hesitate. I hit the call button for 911 with fingers that felt numb and told the operator that I was in my parents' house, that I was supposed to be alone, and that my alarm was showing a door open by itself. The dispatcher asked me to stay on the line and asked where I was in the house. I whispered that I was in the upstairs bedroom with the door locked. She told me officers were on the way and to stay put until they announced themselves. While we talked, I heard the back door. It is a heavy sliding glass door that opens onto the deck. To close it all the way, you have to lift a little on the handle to make it seal in the track. When my dad opens it, it makes this distinct scraping sound as the rubber seal drags. I heard that now, a slow scrape, like the door was being eased shut. My heart slammed so hard, I wondered if the dispatcher could hear it through the phone. She asked me if I had a weapon. I told her I had pepper spray. She told me to keep it with me and not to go into the hall. Then the footsteps started up the stairs. They were not sneaky, just slow, steady. Whoever it was did not care if I heard them. Each step fell with the kind of weight that said they knew I was awake, knew I was listening. At the top of the stairs, they stopped. The hallway was carpeted, so I did not hear the next few steps. I only heard the faint scuff as they passed my door. The shadow under the gap disappeared. Then there was the soft, almost polite click of the guest room door opening again. I whispered to the dispatcher that they were in the house, that they were in the guest room. She told me the officers were turning onto my street and that I would hear them any second. I strained my ears. My parents' house is old enough that the walls are not thick. If you lean your head against the bedroom wall, you can hear sounds from the guest room, faintly. When I did that as a kid, I would hear the radiator hissing or my brother snoring when he used that room. Now I heard drawers opening, slowly, one by one, a pause between each, like whoever was in there was taking their time. Then I heard the closet door slide. For a long moment there was nothing. Then I heard something that made my blood go cold in a way I have never felt before. Breathing, a long, slow inhale, right on the other side of the wall, followed by a quiet chuckle. The sound of it was wrong, not loud, not dramatic, just a soft exhale with a smile buried in it. The kind of sound someone makes when they find something they have been looking for. The dispatcher was talking in my ear, telling me she could see the officer's location. I barely heard her. My entire focus was on that wall and the air moving on the other side. Then outside, headlights washed across my bedroom ceiling. Doors slammed. A loud voice shouted from the front yard, "Police! Call out if anyone is inside." The breathing on the other side of the wall stopped. There was a quick shuffle of movement, then the unmistakable sound of the window in the guest room sliding up. The old wooden frame made a dull thud when it reached the top. The officers shouted again. I heard the front door being forced. Boots on the stairs. A different voice calling my name. I opened my bedroom door as they reached the landing. 3 officers in uniform, guns drawn, eyes sweeping the hall. I was shaking so hard I had to brace myself on the doorframe. I told them the person was in the guest room, that they had just opened the window. 2 of them went straight to that door, flung it open, and rushed inside. The room was empty. The closet door stood open. The cheap plastic hangers inside swayed slightly on the rod, as if someone had brushed past them. The window was open all the way. The screen, which my dad always kept latched, lay on the floor. An officer leaned out the window and shone his flashlight into the yard. I hurried to the glass and looked out too. The ground 1 story below was soft dirt from my mom's recent planting. Clear footprints led away from the house, across the flower bed, and toward the side gate. They were deep, like the person had landed hard. The officers followed the prints out. They found the side gate standing partially open. The neighbor, a few houses down, had a camera on his garage, but by the time anyone thought to check it, the footage only showed a dark shape moving along the fence line and then slipping into the shadows at the end of the street. He had been in the house twice, maybe more, and no one had noticed. He had learned the alarm system well enough to pop the back door without setting off the siren. He knew which room I was sleeping in. He knew there was an empty guest room right next door. When the officers finished clearing the house, they asked if anything looked disturbed. I walked from room to room with them, my stomach twisting. In the guest room, one of the drawers that had been full of extra linens now sat mostly empty. At the back of it, half hidden, was a folded T-shirt that did not belong to any of us. It looked worn and smelled faintly of stale sweat and something else I did not want to identify. In the closet, the extra set of blankets that had always been stored on the top shelf were piled on the floor, arranged in a way that looked like a makeshift mattress. The officer who noticed it looked at me and then at the arrangement with a tight jaw. "He did not just come in tonight," he said quietly. "He has been staying here." They figured he had probably slipped in some time before my parents left, maybe when they were gardening in the front. The alarm did not cover the inside doors, only entry points. Once he was in the guest room, He could stay as long as he kept quiet and picked his moments. The police never found him. They ran the partial image from the neighbor camera through every system they had. They canvassed the area, checked homeless encampments, questioned people at the nearby bus station. Nothing. The best guess was that he was a drifter who had been looking for a place to sleep and stumbled on an unlocked door at some point. Maybe he liked the feeling of living in a house that still had people in it, as long as they did not know he was there. My parents put the house up for sale that month. They changed the locks while they waited, added more cameras, upgraded the alarm. They never slept there again. I stayed one more night to pack my old things. Friends offered to stay over, but I wanted to get it done and never come back. That last night, the house felt more empty than it ever had. Every creak made me jump. Every shadow looked like someone standing very still. Before I left, I went into the guest room with a trash bag to clear out the last of the blankets. At the back of the closet shelf, tucked behind a stack of old magazines, I found something the officers had missed. A cheap disposable razor, a grocery store receipt from 3 weeks earlier, and a small photograph. It was a picture of the front of the house, taken from across the street. In the lower corner of the frame, barely in view, was a person coming up the driveway, carrying a backpack and a coffee cup. Me. I put the photo back exactly where I had found it and never told my parents. They live in a condo now, 6 floors up, with cameras in every hallway and a doorman who checks every visitor. I live across town. I lock every door twice. I still wake up some nights at 3:24 with the feeling that someone is on the other side of the wall, pressing their ear against it, listening to my breathing the way I once listened to theirs. The first time I stayed alone in the little house on Willow Court, I loved it. It was my first place that was not an apartment. 2 bedrooms, old hardwood floors, a tiny front porch with a swing, and a backyard that backed up to a row of tall trees. The rent was cheap because the house was old and the owner lived next door. At 26, with a new job and a tired hatchback, it felt like a win. The owner was an older guy named Frank. He had thick glasses, a permanent sunburn, and a habit of telling the same stories more than once. The day I moved in, he kept saying how nice it was to rent to a responsible young person. He pointed out where the water shutoff was, how to jiggle the back door if it stuck, and which window in the living room never fully latched. He said he lived close, just in case I needed anything. He did not mention that he had a key. I assumed he did, since he owned the place and had been the one to open it for the inspection. I did not think about it much. Plenty of landlords have keys. That is normal. They are supposed to give notice before they use them, but the house felt like mine. I put my books on the shelves. I hung my own curtains. I set up my cheap smart speaker in the kitchen and felt very grown up. My first week there was uneventful. I went to work, stopped for groceries, came home, watched shows, and went to bed. The neighborhood was quiet. The only sounds at night came from crickets and the occasional car in the distance. Frank would wave from his porch if he saw me, but he did not come over. The first odd thing I noticed was small enough that I talked myself out of worrying about it. I came home on a Wednesday to find the hallway light on. I was sure I had switched it off that morning. I am one of those people who checks lights 3 times before leaving because my parents drilled energy savings into my brain. Yet when I opened the front door, the hall glowed bright and warm, and I felt that little prickle at the back of my neck that says something is wrong. I walked through the house with my keys still in my hand. Front door intact, windows shut, back door locked. No sign of forced entry, nothing moved, nothing missing. I ended up blaming myself. Maybe I was distracted rushing to work and left the light on. It happens. I turned it off and tried to forget about it. 2 nights later, the sound woke me. It was a short, sharp click from the front of the house, the kind of noise a lock makes when a key turns. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding. For a few seconds there was nothing. Then I heard the faint creak of the front door hinges and a whisper of cooler air slipping down the hall. I live alone. There was no reason for anyone else to be in my house at midnight. I reached for my phone on the nightstand and checked the time. 12:17. I held my breath and listened again. The house settled. The fridge hummed. The little box fan in my window rattled a tired rhythm. Then I heard it. Soft footsteps on the hardwood. Not heavy, not rushed. Just a slow, steady walk from the entry toward the living room. I did not move. I did not even sit up. Every muscle clenched. My mind raced through possibilities. A break-in. A drunk neighbor who wandered into the wrong house. Frank coming in without permission for some reason. I wrapped my fingers around the small flashlight I kept by the bed and slowly slid my feet to the floor. The footsteps reached the living room and stopped. The sound of movement changed to a quiet rustle. Fabric. Maybe someone brushing past the couch or the curtains. I thought about calling 911. My thumb hovered over the numbers. Then a second thought cut in. If it was Frank, if my landlord had come in to check something because he thought I was out, a police call would turn an uncomfortable misunderstanding into something worse. I told myself I would listen for one more minute before making the call. After that, the house went quiet. No more footsteps. No more rustling. I sat on the edge of the bed for what felt like an hour, staring at the dark doorway. Finally, when my legs started to cramp, I forced myself to stand, clicked on the flashlight, and walked into the hallway. The front door was closed. The chain I installed that first week still hung against the frame, unused. I always latched it when I came home. That night it dangled free. The deadbolt was turned to locked. Nothing looked disturbed. The couch was where I left it. The TV sat dark. My shoes were lined up by the door the same way I always kept them. I walked to the door and checked it. The knob turned easily once I flipped the lock. The only thing even slightly different was the rug. It was crooked, shifted a few inches to the left. I convinced myself again that I had imagined it, that some noise from outside had mixed with a dream. I locked the door. This time I latched the chain and pushed a dining chair under the knob. It felt ridiculous, but when I went back to bed, my heart finally slowed. The next morning, I found something that made it impossible to keep pretending. I keep my coffee mugs in the cabinet above the stove. It is a habit to open that door without looking. I reach up, grab the handle, and pull. That morning when I did, my hand brushed something rough. I looked up. In front of my favorite mug, at the very edge of the shelf, sat a small folded note. I froze. The paper was torn from a yellow legal pad, a piece about 3 inches wide, folded in half. The outside was blank. I stood there for a solid minute, hand hovering, the smell of coffee grounds strong in the air, my mind trying to catch up with what my eyes saw. I do not leave notes in my own cupboards. My hands shook as I unfolded it. The handwriting was cramped and slanted. 2 short sentences. You should lock your windows. You sleep too deeply. My stomach dropped. I read it 3 times, hoping the words would change. They did not. Someone had been close enough to watch me sleep, close enough to know how my face looked when I was out, close enough to know which windows I forgot to check before bed. And they had been comfortable enough inside my house to climb onto my counter and tuck a note into my cabinet. I grabbed my phone and called Frank. My voice wobbled as I asked if he had come inside for any reason lately. At first he sounded confused, then defensive. What reason would I have to go in when you are not home? He said, like the idea offended him. You got your keys. I respect privacy. I was a tenant once too. I told him about the note. He went quiet. You sure it was not left from the last tenant? He asked. Maybe you just did not see it before. I stared at the paper. The words were too specific, too recent. It mentioned how I slept. The old tenant had moved out months before I ever saw the place. I told him that. He hesitated, then said he would come by that afternoon to look at the locks. His voice had shifted into a practical tone, like a maintenance call. I hung up, feeling more unsettled than relieved. When he came, he did a slow circuit of the house, just like the day I moved in. He checked the front lock, jiggled the back door, slid the windows up and down. He kept saying there was no sign of forced entry, no marks on the door, no pry scratches on the frames. Someone has a key, I said. He shrugged and said landlords always keep one, but his was in the locked box in his kitchen drawer. He even offered to show me. We walked to his house. and he opened the drawer to reveal a little gray lockbox with a keyhole. He said he had not opened it since the last tenant moved out. It sounded rehearsed. He wrote down the number for a locksmith and said if I wanted to pay to change the locks, he would not stop me. Then he gave me that same old story about trusting your neighbors and how the world had gotten paranoid. I changed the locks that weekend anyway. The locksmith replaced both front and back deadbolts and gave me 2 new keys. I watched every movement, memorizing how the mechanisms went in. When he left, I sat on the couch with all my lights on and called my sister to tell her what had happened. Saying it out loud made me feel a little better. By the time I went to bed, I had convinced myself that whoever had been coming in would give up once the locks changed. The next strange thing did not happen at night. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was homesick from work, half asleep on the couch with a blanket over my head. The blinds were tilted closed, but a little line of light across the bottom of them let me see shadows on the front window. I heard footsteps on the porch, not the quick, careless step of a package delivery. Slow, testing the boards. The doorbell did not ring. Instead, there was a gentle rattle at the knob, then a long pause, then another rattle, this time more insistent, as if someone was turning the knob and expecting it to give. I muted the TV and slid off the couch as quietly as I could. I crawled along the floor until I could see the bottom corner of the window where the light slipped through. Boots. Brown work boots. Close enough to the door that the tips touched it. A soft sigh came through the wood. Then, in a low voice, one word. Really? It was not loud. Not for my benefit. It was the way someone talks to themselves when they are annoyed, like they had expected something to be easier. I did not move. I did not even breathe. The person on the porch stayed there another few seconds, then stepped back. The boots moved out of view. A shadow crossed the window. I heard the board on the second step creak as they went down. Then nothing. I waited 5 minutes before standing up. My legs tingled from being crouched so long. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. Empty porch, quiet street. Frank porch across the gravel drive was also empty. His truck sat in the same spot it always did. That night, I pushed the dining chair under my bedroom door again. I set a heavy pot in front of the back door, balanced just so that any movement would knock it over and wake me. It felt like something I would have done as a kid. It also made me feel like I had some control. Around 2 in the morning, the pot fell. The clang jolted me upright in bed. I grabbed the flashlight and phone and ran into the kitchen before I could talk myself out of it. The pot lay on its side, in the middle of the floor. The back door was shut. The deadbolt was still turned. I stared at it, my breath loud. Then I noticed something else. The small chain lock I always slid across the doorframe at night hung open. I knew I had latched it. It was part of my little ritual now. Lock, chain, pot. It would have taken a small pull on the door to jostle the chain and shift the pot enough to fall. Someone had tried the handle, felt the resistance of the new lock, and given it a tug. I called 911 this time. The officers who came were polite, but tired. They walked the perimeter, shined flashlights along the fence line, checked windows. They found shoe prints in the dirt by the back step. The tread looked like work boots, the same kind of soles I saw on my floor. They asked if anyone might know my schedule. I said I had only been there a few weeks. They asked about the landlord. I told them about Frank, about the key, about the note. One of them looked at the other for a second. Just a glance. They went next door and knocked. Lights came on in Frank's house. He appeared in the doorway rubbing his eyes and pretending to be surprised by the late visit. They talked on his porch for a while. I could not hear what they said. At one point he turned his head and looked squarely at my house. I stepped back from the window. When the officers came back, they told me that Frank said he had been asleep and had not seen anyone. They suggested motion lights for the backyard and offered to have a patrol swing by more often at night. It was not much, but it was something. The next day I found the second note. It was not in a hidden place. It sat on my kitchen counter, in front of the toaster. Same torn yellow paper. Same cramped, slanted handwriting. The front door is harder now. You should stop calling the police. My hands went cold. He had been inside while I talked to officers in my living room. He had stood close enough to hear me say their names, to see where they stood. He knew exactly what I was doing. He had a view of my fear and had time to sit at my counter and write about it. I did not call Frank this time. I called my sister again and begged to stay with her for a few days while I figured out what to do. She lived across town in a gated complex. When I got there that evening, dragging a bag of clothes and my laptop, she stared at the note and said I should move out. I agreed. What made it complicated was the lease and the fact that all my things were still in that house. Furniture, clothes, documents, all the boring pieces you forget about until you need them. We decided to go back together the next afternoon to pack as much as we could in boxes and figure out the rest later. We pulled into the gravel drive around 2, early enough that the sun was bright and every shadow felt less threatening. Frank's truck was gone. His porch was empty. My sister parked her car as close to my front door as she could. Inside, the house smelled slightly different, less like my cheap candles and more like sweat and old fabric. It made my skin crawl. I told myself it was just my imagination or the closed-up air. We moved quickly. I packed kitchen drawers while my sister broke down the bed frame. Every few minutes, I caught myself glancing at the door, expecting it to move. It stayed shut. We did not talk much. The tension made easy conversation feel strange. It was my sister who found the last thing. She opened the coat closet by the front door to grab an extra box and stopped. Her voice sounded wrong when she called my name, flat and tight. I came over and saw what she was looking at. Inside the closet, behind my winter coat and a stack of old shoes, someone had set up a small folding chair. On the shelf above it were 3 empty water bottles and a plastic container that once held peanuts. A thin blanket was crumpled on the floor. At eye level, 3 small holes had been drilled into the drywall, directly facing the slats of the closet door. I pushed the door shut slightly and stood where it would normally be. Through the tiny holes, I could see the living room, the couch where I spent my evenings, the TV where I watched late-night shows, the hallway that led to my bedroom. He had been sitting in that closet, on that chair, breathing through those holes, watching me live my life a few feet away, hidden behind my own coats. On the wall opposite the closet, near the ceiling, there were faint marks where paint had chipped. If you looked closely, you could see the outline of a rectangle where something used to hang. Maybe a mirror. Maybe a picture frame. The previous tenant had likely covered those viewing holes once. When they moved out, someone had pulled the frame and reopened them. I left that house that day and never slept there again. Frank sent me messages about breaking the lease and how it was unfair. I sent him pictures of the closet and the notes and copied the officer who had given me his card. The messages stopped. I heard from a neighbor months later that the house stayed empty for a long time. Then one day, a new car appeared in the drive, and new curtains showed up in the front window. Sometimes I think about knocking on that door. I imagine a young person opening it, excited about their first house, sure that the cheap rent is just luck. I imagine their landlord smiling from his porch and reminding them to jiggle the back door if it sticks. I imagine that closet, still there, just inside. And I picture how easy it would be for someone with a spare key and too much time to sit down in the dark, bring their eye to the little holes, and wait for the lights in the living room to come on. I had been alone in my house for only 2 weeks when the noises started. The place was an old 2-story rental on the edge of town. White siding, wide front porch, large trees that dropped leaves in thick piles every fall. It had been empty for months before I moved in. The landlord said it just needed someone who would not mind the age of the place. I took it because the rent was low, and my last apartment had neighbors who screamed at each other through the walls every night. I liked the quiet. I liked the space. I liked the deep creaking sound the stairs made when I walked up to my bedroom at the end of the day. It felt warm, lived in, like a house with memories. For the first week, I barely unpacked. I slept on a mattress on the floor. I spent evenings eating takeout on the porch or listening to music while I tried to figure out where to put things. Nothing strange happened. No odd feelings. No sense that anything was wrong. The first noise came on a Wednesday night. I had finished dinner and was rinsing plates when I heard something at the far end of the house. A short, sharp knock from the inside of the hall closet under the stairs. Not the shuffle of a mouse or the creak of old wood. A knock. Distinct. Too clear to be anything else. I turned off the faucet and listened. The house settled around me. The fridge hummed. Outside, a car rolled past. I waited for another sound. Nothing came. I walked to the closet and put my hand on the doorknob. It felt cold, even though the rest of the house was warm from the oven. I opened it and stared into the dark, narrow space. Just a vacuum, a box of winter coats, a bucket of cleaning supplies the landlord had left behind. Nothing else. I closed the door and tried to shake it off, as the house shifting. The next night it happened again. This time it was not a knock. It was a slow, dragging sound. Something moving across the floor inside the closet, like fabric being pulled. I stood in the hall with the plate I had been drying still in my hand and listened as it scraped faintly against the wood. I opened the door again. This time the vacuum was on its side. I told myself I had left it like that without noticing. That Friday, I found the first sign that someone had been inside the house. I came home after work and went into the kitchen. My dish towel had been moved. It had been hanging in a neat fold on the oven handle when I left that morning. Now it was draped over the counter, spread flat like someone had laid it out and inspected it. I checked the back door, locked. I checked the windows, closed. The front door showed no marks around the lock. I called the landlord. He said no one had a spare key but him. He said he had not been inside. He said maybe I had forgotten something. Maybe I had left the towel out. Maybe the vacuum had fallen over because the floor was uneven. Maybe the house was settling. He told me old houses make people jumpy. That night I pushed a chair under my bedroom door. It made me feel ridiculous and childish, but the house had begun to feel like someone else was in it. Saturday morning I woke to a thump, not from downstairs, from the wall beside my bed. A single dull impact. It made the lamp on my nightstand tremble. I sat up fast and stared at the wall. It was the wall that connected to the hallway outside the bathroom. For a moment I thought a pipe had burst or something had fallen. Then I heard something else. Breathing. Not loud, not heavy, just the faint sound of someone trying not to be heard. It lasted 3 seconds, maybe 4. Long enough that I knew without a doubt it was not an animal, not the house, not a pipe, a person. On the other side of the wall, I grabbed my phone. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold it. I walked to the hallway and listened. Nothing. The air felt stale. The sunlight coming through the bathroom window looked normal, but the hallway itself felt wrong, heavy, like someone had been standing there moments before I opened my bedroom door. I checked the entire house. Nothing was moved. Nothing was missing. Every lock was still shut. That was the first morning I realized I could not keep pretending I was imagining things. That afternoon I told myself I would stay out of the house as long as possible. I walked for hours, went to the grocery store, sat in the library until it closed. When I came home after dark, the house felt still again, quiet, normal. I tried to believe I had overreacted. Before bed, I put my ear to the wall beside my mattress. Nothing. I checked the closet. Nothing. I locked my bedroom door and set the chair again. Around 3 in the morning, I woke to the unmistakable sound of footsteps downstairs. Slow, careful, bare feet on old wood. I stayed frozen in bed. My mouth went dry. The floor creaked once, then again, like someone shifting their weight near the bottom of the stairs. I listened for the familiar settling noise of the house. There was none. The footsteps moved toward the hall closet under the stairs. I knew that sound well by then. A slight groan in the 3rd stair from the bottom. That one always creaked louder. Then the sound stopped. Not because the person had left, because they were standing still, listening, right under my bedroom. I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911. I whispered to the dispatcher what I was hearing. She told me officers were on the way and to stay in the room. Stay quiet. Do not open the door unless police announce themselves. 5 long minutes passed. I heard nothing. Not a breath. Not a footstep. Not even the house settling. Just silence. When the patrol car pulled up, its headlights swept through the living room windows. The dispatcher told me the officers were outside. A moment later, I heard the knock. "Police. Are you inside? Call out for us." I opened the door and ran downstairs. 2 officers stood in the entry, flashlights sweeping the corners of the room. I told them everything, every sound, every knock, every strange thing that had happened. They searched the house from top to bottom, checked closets, the attic, the basement, every window, every door. Nothing showed signs of forced entry. But the hall closet door under the stairs was not closed all the way. It stood open an inch. I swore I had shut it. The officer opened it fully and shined his light inside. Nothing. He tapped the walls. Nothing. He moved the coats aside, checked behind the boxes. Nothing. I felt the pressure in my chest loosen for a moment. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe all of it had been in my head. Then he crouched down. He angled his flashlight beneath the lowest shelf. A dark gap ran behind the wall, a narrow opening just wide enough for a person to slide into. I had never noticed it before. The shelf sat flush against the wall, unless you pressed down on the front edge. When he did, the back rose up slightly, revealing the space behind it. The officer lifted the shelf. Behind it was a crawl space, a tunnel. It ran under the stairs and disappeared into the dark. Something glinted in the light. A bottle cap, a crumpled food wrapper, a rumpled piece of cloth that looked like someone had slept on it, and a shoe print, clear in the dust, barefoot, adult-sized. My stomach dropped. The officer swore under his breath and called the second officer over. They followed the tunnel with their lights and saw where it continued into a small gap between the staircase, boards, and the wall, just wide enough for someone to shimmy through. Someone had been living inside the hollow under my stairs, listening to me, walking around the house while I slept, watching. The officers searched everywhere again. They checked outside, the yard, the alley, the neighbor yards. Whoever had been there was gone. The dust around the crawl space showed recent movement. The footprint was fresh. They believed me then. They told me to pack a bag and stay somewhere else for the night. One of the officers stayed while I threw clothes into a backpack with shaking hands. When I went back downstairs, he looked at me with a tight jaw and told me not to come back until the landlord sealed the crawl space. I stayed with my coworker for a week. During that time, the landlord had the staircase torn open. What they found made my skin crawl all over again. 2 blankets, a pile of energy bar wrappers, a cheap flashlight, a half-empty bottle of water, and a small notebook. Inside were pages of cramped writing. Most were short sentences. She leaves lights on in the kitchen. She forgets to lock the back window. She talks in her sleep. She stands at the sink for a long time every night. She does not hear the stairs creak when she is on the phone. The last page made my hands go numb when the officer read it to me. She hears me now. She listens at night. She is getting careful. I need to get closer. I need to see her. I did not go back to that house, not even to pack the rest of my things. The landlord sent someone to collect them and drop them off at my coworker place. He apologized again and again, but there was nothing he could say that would undo what I knew now. Someone had lived inches from me for weeks, close enough to hear my breath through the walls, close enough to stand under my bed at night, close enough to knock when they wanted to hear me freeze. I moved across town. Then I moved again. I check under every staircase now. I press on every wall. I cover every crawl space. I do not sleep without a light on. Every house has noises. Every house settles. Every house has dark corners where the air feels thick. I listen to all of them, because now I know what it sounds like when someone listens back.